We are not alone. And welcome back to Contact TV, everyone. This is Leslie Mitchell Clark,
Wes Roberts.
and of course, we are here once again to bend your mind, open your mind, and of course, we do that with some incredible guests. And today, we're super excited because we are welcoming back for part three of this fascinating interview USMC Captain Randy Cramer, who you may also know by I guess, the nom de plume Captain K. Now, Captain Randy Cramer is a nearly lifelong experienced your contactee, as well as a U.S. military participant in the off world parallel space programs that have been taking place since the 1950s on Mars, the Moon, and elsewhere. He is an officer who's been given authority to address the public on behalf of the command staff of the United States Marine Corps Special Section, which was created by Eisenhower in 53 as a covert military intelligence branch with the specific authority over extraterrestrial, multidimensional, non-human, and off-world beings, consortiums, and collectives, either sanctioned or unsanctioned. And Captain K is the product of the Soldier Augmentation Project entitled Moonshadow. And that was a training program for children, which began really at about age 4. He later spent a 20-year tour of duty off world, and for over 17 years of which he was serving with the Mars Defense Force. He finished his service aboard the EDF SS Nautilus as a pilot under Project Radiant Guardian. And in August 2013, Captain Cramer's superior officers requested that he consider going public with their blessing, and he began to share his remarkable personal experiences with the world in April 2014. And of course, from that time up to the present time, Captain Cramer is speaking at various international ufology focused conventions, conferences, radio programs, and he is also a teacher of psionics, which is a powerful remote viewing technique that has a myriad of positive applications. So, without further ado, we are welcoming back our friend, Captain Randy Cramer. Hey, Randy, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
Our pleasure. And of course, in our previous interviews, we have walked through much of your experience as a child and even previous to that, your early experience and training in the Mars Defense Force. And perhaps in this interview, we could talk a little bit about the events that led up to the end of your tour of duty as part of that military operation, and how you were able to be integrated and move back in the timeline and resume your life, and how that was for you psychologically.
Oh, wow. Sure. Well, I mean, the wrap up of my career was the last few years that I spent as a pilot, stationed on the Nautilus as a member of an air wing, which they still call them air wings, even though it's you're out in space. The same, sort of in the same way that we flew a incredibly high speed craft, which is usually a single pilot craft, which some people refer to as a dart vehicle or dart craft because they're small and they're pointy, because they're for high velocity flight. They're not necessarily just for, I mean, a saucer craft can easily achieve speeds of, 25, 35, you know, thousand miles an hour. But these craft that we flew are designed to go twice as fast as that, much faster in open space.
Superluminal
And
flight, Randy. This is superluminal flight.
this is this is just still using the modern physics of magnetogravitics, electrogravitics, in what I would call, you're still sublight. So this is not designed to, travel vast distances across space using, light speeds, hyperspace speeds or anything like that. This is just using all of the mechanical, electrical knowledge that that we have on space flight and getting absolutely the fastest speed that you can out of a vehicle, because as we understand here on Earth, air power means everything. And so when you have faster, better planes that can outpace everybody else's planes, you win. And we understand the same thing is true in space. When you have vehicles, which, again, we still call them planes. They're not planes because in the same way that in the Navy, a ship is a large ship and a small boat is a boat, in the same way that a gun is a large, artillery gun, and that what you carry next to you as a sidearm, as a pistol, as a rifle is not a gun. So in the same way that you have these distinctions, the vehicles that we flew, even though they're space-faring craft, they're not referred to as spaceships because a ship is much larger. So we still called them, but it's not a jet either. So we still called them planes. So, it was, pilots to your planes. How's your plane? How's your plane mechanic? Maintaining your plane. So even though these are incredibly high-tech, high-speed spacecraft, we still call them planes. But they're incredibly fast. And the whole point is, as we're patrolling the solar system, anything that comes into our airspace that's not allowed, that we don't want to be there, and that we want to be able to chase away, we want to be able to be faster, stronger, more maneuverable, and have, faster punching power than they do, because that's what military strength is about. Military strength is about having a better, faster tool that punches harder and faster than what somebody else has. And as terrestrial humans, we're really good at that. There are species who are flying the same spacecraft that they have been flying for thousands of years. They have not bothered to upgrade them. They have not bothered to make them faster, have not bothered. No, why bother? In some cases, you got to understand, for some species, the notion of taking something that you made and going, no, that's not good enough. We can do better. And refining it again and again and again and again and again. That's a very human trait. It's a very terrestrial human trait. It's not something that all species participate in. Some species are perfectly happy to make, hey, we have a fast spacefaring vehicle. It gets us where we want to go. It gets us there in about the speeds that we want to go. Pretty much does the business that we need to get it to. Okay, we're good. We don't need to refine that. We don't need to rebuild that. We don't need to make that better. We can pretty much build the same design, which is incredibly cost effective when you think about it. We'll build the same design for the next, several thousand years because we don't need to bother. Why bother? We, on the other hand, are never happy or satisfied with what we've made. We, especially when you're talking about military tools and military weaponry, it becomes because we know in a history of arms races, going, back to the Middle Ages and beyond, when it was, the longbow to the crossbow to the siege catapult. I mean, these were all, things that every time someone made a missile launcher that could shoot a bigger, sharper, pointier stick farther away, you had a distinct advantage, and an advantage that would win castles and win territory. So we understand that, wanting to keep up that ability to have something that's better, faster, stronger is how you continue to win, military sorties. And so we have continued to want to make these vehicles faster and faster and faster and stronger, and give them, faster and harder punching power, so that the plasma cannon that fires out the front, which a plasma cannon isn't much more than a lightning gun. It fires essentially an intense beam of plasma, which is like a lightning bolt out the front. And, I think, we were firing a plasma gun that was shooting about, 1.5 million joules per shot. That's a huge amount of power. And the whole point with something like that is to, you're not trying to blow something apart. You're trying to hit it and penetrate it with an intense amount of electrical energy to penetrate the fuselage, penetrate the electrical equipment, and just fry everything out. You penetrate something with a 1.5 million joule bolt and blow out their electronics, blow out their computers, blow out their engines. Well, then they're dead in the water. They're going nowhere, since everything runs on electrical power and runs on electrical engines of some kind and electricity of some kind. You hit it with a more powerful electrical zap and it blows everything out. So in, close sort of dogfighting, that's the most powerful thing that you want to have. Now, these are also equipped with what I would say are, smart bomb weaponry, which we called missiles or bombs, depending on, what they were. But, you're packed on the left and the right sides, and they can, they sort of have a drum that rotates them around into a firing position, and then they pop out and shoot out. Those things, if you need to hit something bigger, or you need to hit something that's stationary, or you need to hit something that's a big building that's supposed to be, less penetrable by artillery or something like that, you want to hit it with something that's really big and really hard, then, we fire bombs or missiles at it. And so, these little vehicles, they're incredibly fast and incredibly, highly weaponized. And an air wing, which is, a couple dozen planes, represents a substantial amount of firepower. And when a highliner, which is the Nautilus class is called a highliner, which is essentially a floating aircraft carrier, and you have 5 or 6 air wings of planes at any time that can be deployed, it represents an incredible amount of firepower. And so that was our basic goal, was to patrol the solar system with that level of firepower, so that anything that approached that wasn't supposed to approach, we essentially scare them out of the yard. And I really used to think of ourselves as glorified guard dogs, because something comes in his face and you rah, 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 and you'd chase them out, until they go away. And most of the time they turn around and run and go the other way. Most of the time when you would run into what I would call, a non-friendly or someone that wasn't allowed to be there, they were basically trying to sneak in, and essentially they get caught sneaking in and, met with a force of an air wing of ships, planes that could overpower them intensely. They're going to run away. They're mostly just going to run away. Every once in a while, we get hit with an EMP and, have our electronics knocked out and tumble around in space for a few minutes. Pardon me, it's still allergy season here.
It's okay.
And so that was mostly what we did. That was mostly part of that. There was a couple other...
Were these vehicles, were they psionically controlled? Did they have some type of psionic interface? And did you fly them in tandem? I mean, they're awfully small. Were you on your own, or did you have a co-pilot? How did that work?
Most of the time, you have a combination of computer control and control that's coming from the Nautilus, from the highliner. So your navigation systems, in some cases, the firing or control of your missile or bomb systems is controlled from a remote location. The pilot's job is mostly to fly the plane and, fire the plasma cannons when necessary. We certainly practice flying in formations. We certainly practice, evasive, defensive, offensive maneuvers. So, I mean, we had whole strategies for, how to engage with an opponent at incredible speeds, and, with vehicles that don't just have to go in a straight line and then curve, that vehicles that can jump side to side and jump up and shoot forward and shoot backward at incredible speeds, or accelerate forwards, at incredible speeds and stop and turn on a dime. So there's a lot of crazy things that you can do with them. The primary interface was physical. Mm-hmm. So we had the main control mechanism in front of us was actually a sphere that your hands fit into. It basically had what I would say an ergonomic grips for your right and your left hand on either side. And so that really becomes your stick, as it were. And so that moves in different directions to control the motion of the vehicle. Your hands are also in the position that they're finger controls. So your thumb and your tips of your fingers are on controls that when you press them or slide them, they do something on both the left and the right. You also have control with the chair. So as you slide your hips left, right, you're also creating a certain motion with that. So it's this very physiological process where your entire body is flying the plane, but in this very sort of tight, controlled space. Now there is what I would call a cerebral interface, but the cerebral interface, I wouldn't say enables you to psionically control the ship. The cerebral interface is more about navigation, tracking, communication, and targeting, so that all the information that you're getting back and forth from your brain to the other pilot's brains, that's projected out in front of you in sort of this virtual, layout that projected in front of you, is mostly for tactics and logistics, and communication, but not the actual physical control of the vehicle. The physical control of the vehicle is still with the pilot's body. And all I can say to that is, from having discussions with a few higher ranking pilots than myself, would suggest that over time, what they found was that if you want a pilot to fly the vehicle better, you want better pilots, and better pilots are responsive to the vehicle, not necessarily the other way around. And so you want a vehicle that interfaces with the pilot, and the pilot to interface with the vehicle in such a way that they are co-responsive to each other, because that's how you train a better pilot to fly that vehicle, is when the pilot essentially becomes in tune physiologically with the responses of that vehicle, so that race car drivers are the same way. I mean, a race car driver is in a co-responsive relationship with the vehicle that they're driving in order to drive a faster, better car. And fighter pilots are essentially in a co-responsive situation with the vehicle that they're flying to be a better pilot. So, and if they had made the vehicles too easy to fly, you wouldn't be training your pilots how to fly them. You would just have someone who needs to push a button, and that doesn't train your pilot to be a better pilot. In order to be a better pilot, you want the system to be co-responsive. For instance, the inertial dampers from the electrogravitic field can completely nullify the sense or feeling of motion or gravity, so that you don't feel that you're moving left or right or up or down. So our vehicles were actually turned down just enough so that you could feel that. You want to be able to feel when you go left, you want to feel when you go right. You're going at such speeds that if you were in a non-inertial dampered vehicle, you get thrown and splattered up against the wall or the front or the back, like, the first time that you wanted to slide at 20,000 miles an hour, turn 90 degrees, and then, launch yourself forwards or push yourself up again. I mean, there's just no way you can handle the G-forces of that. So you have to have the inertial dampers, but you turn it down just enough so that you can feel it. Otherwise, you're not being responsive to the vehicle. You might as well be, in a pod, flying remotely like a drone pilot, which, not to pick an attack on drone pilots, but drone pilots are not as good as regular pilots because they're sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
They're not co-responsive with the vehicle. If you're co-responsive with the vehicle, you become a better pilot.
I have a question, Randy, to harken back to something you were saying. So the other alien species out there, they didn't have technology that was this good, or they didn't have technology that was based on something else that we don't have?
It turns out, again, because most of them are perfectly satisfied with what they have, that as we have over the decades of taking what they have and turning it into something that we have, but then going, I think we can do this better. I think we can make this faster. I think we can make this more responsive. I think that we can. It turns out that what we have right now And not to say that there aren't ETs that can have better ships. I would say, though, that in the tier of technology that we primarily are dealing with, especially when you're talking about hostility, ETs that have much more advanced technology that could be hostile could be incredibly more problematic. But it turns out that most of the ETs who are hostile don't have that technology. They don't have that access to that technology because hostility dampens your own energy and it dampens your own evolution. And so you can only develop technology and weaponry to a certain level when you're hostile, when you're emotionally, spiritually hostile. It really limits your ability to expand far beyond that. So most of the species that have amazing craft are simply not hostile. So when you're talking about the tiers of evolution that are hostile, which there are plenty of them, but it's still less than 5% of what we experience as the total. So I would say that overall 95% of the ETs that we experience or that we know are non-hostile. About 5% represent hostility. But when you're talking about where we're now, got a species list that's in the thousands, 5% is still a lot. 5% still represents a pretty good number.
Forgive me I just had a question. One time, I think we were talking, I don't think we discussed this on the air, but you told me about an incursion during this period of time near when you were assigned to the Nautilus, where you and your wing conducted a mission to deal with some particularly nasty graves. I think on one of the moons of Phobos. Is that
Ganymede? The Battle of Ganymede. Yeah. No, that was a pretty fierce event. So the forward operating station of the Zetas at that time was on Ganymede, and we had been, for many years, we had given them eviction notices. And from the way I understand how this works, in order for us to demonstrate to our extraterrestrial brothers and sisters who were observing and let's just call it nurturing our ability to become a member of the intergalactic community, we had to demonstrate that we could do two things. That we could control our own space, and so someone that wasn't supposed to be there, that we could remove them from that space. But we also had to demonstrate that we could do so with restraint. Because to just say, get out of here, and then if they don't leave in 5 minutes, okay, we gave you 5 minutes, and then to physically attack them represents a total lack of restraint. And that makes you not look like you're ready for, intergalactic, participation if you can't demonstrate restraint. So from what I understand, it was a process, that's worse than most, legal processes of, all right, we've given you an eviction notice. Well, we filed, a counter notice and we say that we have a right to be here and we don't want to leave. Okay, that's going to take a certain amount of months or years to resolve and then say, no, we've really legally concluded that you're not supposed to be there. So here's, your second eviction notice, you have to leave. Well, here's the reasons why we think we still should get to stay. And so there was really this lengthy, protracted, argument on the legal side between you have to go, no, we don't have to go, yes, you have to go, no, we don't have to go, yes, you have to go, no, we don't have to go, yes, you have to go, before we could actually have a military response. And that military response still had to be measured. We couldn't just, walk up to the front door and say, okay, here's our military response, pound, 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 get out of here. It still had to be a measured response. And so what was really this slow escalation finally turned into the Battle of Ganymede. And the Battle of Ganymede was when enough highliners, showed up and stood outside the front door and said, you're leaving, and we're not leaving until you leave. And if you don't leave, we're giving you X number of, days or weeks, as it were, and if you don't leave by this time, then we will start, to do things that forcibly remove you, which include, attacking power generators, life support systems. You attack the things that make it so they can't stay there. So you don't necessarily go, blowing up the habitation units, right away. You go after the things that make them able to habitate there so that they have to leave. You force them to leave by cutting off their power, cutting off their air, cutting off their food supplies, cutting off the things that allow them to stay. And so there was this lengthy, protracted event that just went on and on and on until, they finally sort of, as their last-ditch effort, put a certain amount of energy into this very powerful shielding that was, keeping us out, and started powering up, a weapon that probably, one shot, could have cut through a Highliner, and taken out an entire ship of, air wings and personnel. But I hate to say that this is so reflective of, movie scripts, but it just kind of is reflective of movie scripts that we've heard of, because weapons of that size take an incredible amount of power, and they often take an incredible amount of charging up. They have, capacitor devices that take an incredible amount of charging before you can, deploy that level of energy, before you can, emanate that level of energy. And so that gives you a certain amount of time that you have to deal with, the shielding, deal with the weapon before, your forces are actually at risk. And so we actually, while we were waiting as an air wing, sort of outside this bubble while they were powering up this weapon, and we were giving, a countdown of how many hours, we had to bring the shield down, and what the strategy for bringing the shield down was, and what the conversation about how we could bring down the shield, or what the potential vulnerabilities were. We sort of made a decision to go for it, as it were. And there was a area of space between the ground and the bottom of the shield. If the shield touched the ground, it would have grounded out the ionic what do I want to say? The ionic charge of that shield, and would have grounded it out.
Right.
So it had to be kept so many meters off of the ground.
Just science. If it was
Right.
grounded, it was grounded. That was it.
It would, right, and it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So it had to be kept a certain number of meters off the ground. So we knew that we had so many meters between the bottom of the shield and the ground that we could slip under. The question that we didn't have answered was whether or not there was going to be a EMP effect if you flew underneath it that would knock out the power in the planes. And if that happened, you'd fly underneath it, your power would get knocked out, and then you'd tumble right into the ground and basically blow up, and it would not be it would be a short trip. And so while the conversation was being had on, whether this was an option or whether or not we were going to do this or not, we sort of made a executive decision as an air wing and said, well, we're just gonna fly under it and give it a shot. And so got low down to the ground and flew under the shield, crossed our fingers, held our breath. There was not an EMP effect. We were able to get in and started to, shoot down generators that were able to put a hole in the shield, but then got the rest of the air wing in, and we were able to destabilize the shield, destabilize the weapon, and then essentially, destroy anything and everything that was giving them support to be there. So telling them, forcing whatever life forms were still alive at the end of this process, that had survived the process, that they had to leave, and forcing them to finally be evicted from the space. But it was a harrowing event. I'm not going to lie, it was a harrowing event.
So these were the Zeta Reticuli that have, beyond agreements, have continued to mess about with individuals and take DNA and do whatever it is that they do, really against, as I understand it, the prime directive now of no more of these genetic incursions that they have made.
Right. The Zeta A's, which, to make it super complicated, people who don't know this, the Zetas are broken down into about 5 different factions. Essentially, the 2 major factions are the Zeta A's and the Zeta B's, who are at civil war with each other. So there's not unification among them. There is a civil war happening among the Zetas, which is basically separated by the Zeta A's and the Zeta B's. And then among those, you have the Zeta A1s, the Zeta A2s, and the Zeta A3s. And then you have the Zeta B1s and the Zeta B2s. So there are no less than 5 individual factions of Zetas on 2 separate sides of the Civil War, but 3 separate entities on one side, 2 separate entities on the other side that still represent their own interests, their own way of doing things, their own specific system of politics, their own specific system of administration of government, their own specific system of administration of science and technology, and their own variations on ethics, morals, and law. And so the Zeta A's, I would say, are the most lawless and the most without ethics. The Zeta B's, not so much. They have a certain system of agreement with law and morals and ethics, although you could still call it sketchy. But at least when certain people talk about agreements that we had with the Zetas, there was a agreement that we initially had with the Zeta A's. Then the Zeta B's came along, and we realized there was factions and there was a problem, and then we made an agreement with the Zeta B's that we thought was a much better agreement. And then over time it just became a mess, and someone finally decided, okay,